General. This is really to do with anybody who's in business at the moment and anybody who's operating any size organisation. And what it's about is just trying to position where we are now and some ideas on how we might go about helping to plan what we're going to do now and what we're going to do to help get ourselves moving forward on it. And it'll drop through. So it's basically for the businesses or any organisation that's facing some issues with the current crisis. So can everybody see my screen? I just want to make sure that if you could just all indicate that you can see the actual presentation screen, that would be useful. If you just type into the chat room that you can see the screen, please. Hello? Yes, fantastic. That's all I need to know. It's just, that's brilliant. So what we're really dealing with, I think, and what we've seen, and I think the evidence is we've had quite a few people sort of want to come to this, and those of you have come along, fantastic. Some haven't, but I think the major issue that we're facing just at the moment is that the amount of information and misinformation around coronavirus is quite staggering. I've looked at a couple of things like this in the past, and we've never seen the wealth of information and disinformation that we've got. So the question for businesses is, how on earth do you cut through? How do you do what's right for your people? And how do you do what's right for your businesses and for you? Because you've got to support your people if you've got people you work with. You've got to get your operations working because we're all working differently. We're working from home. And we've also got to work around cash flow issues, which is a big problem for a lot of folks. And then if we can, we've got to start, once we've stabilized, you've got to start to recover the business. Then you've got things like rumors, gossip, emotions, and in some cases panic that you've got to deal with. So it is pretty difficult. The projections were not looking good for business. I think they've improved with some of the initiatives of government, and there have been some more announced this morning in the last hour or so by Morrison around childcare, which I think is going to help. And the government is doing its best to fight off some form of recession. I think that I'm just trying to make sure that everybody can see. Everybody should see comments from everybody now. I think that we will probably go into some form of recession, but I think the actions that we're taking now may help stave off the worst of it. People aren't spending on non-essentials and need a plan. I think the contagion has flattened. Whether or not it's peaked yet is difficult to say. I think the statisticians are right. I think worldwide we'll see a long tail. The tail will probably be shorter in Australia. And that's based on work that I've done previously in risk management when I was at Cambridge, working with medics around various crises in the past. It isn't clear, it's never clear what path a virus like this is going to take, and it's impossible to predict how many people will be infected. The forecast doesn't look good, but I think it looks better than it did perhaps a week ago. But if we're not ready now, we need to get ready now. So I've been working furiously, myself and colleagues, trying to make sure that we're all going along as best we can. Who am I? Some of you know me, some of you don't. Just very briefly, 30 years practicing, teaching and researching about risk and crisis management. I've turned around 2 enterprises from crisis back to not business as usual, but certainly normal business operations. I've been an expert witness on major transport accident in the UK and a public health crisis as well there. And I've just finished a multi-year project with Coca-Cola where we looked at their crisis management, their leadership and their teams. So I've got some practical and theoretical knowledge of this whole area and some skills in it too. I've got some of the scars, and I always like the quote from Oscar Wilde that experience is simply the name we give to our mistakes. So yes, made some mistakes along the way as well. What happens, and this is now really well researched work with these sorts of events, and don't forget, it's not just things like public health crises that affect organisations. I've done more work and reframing of this, talking about disruption. These sort of things are acute crises, and they really give us time to think about three major things, and I call them currencies. That's the currency of people, you and your team and your partners and customers, the operations, and money, or indeed cash flow. And in business, to continue in business, we ourselves have got to work on this, and we've got to help other people with this. You need to bring people, operations, and cash flow under quite close control to really continue in business and to recover the business. Because what tends to happen, and that's the pattern I'm suggesting on this chart, is that as we go into a crisis, we start to go to red isn't the best color to choose on that one. Let's go with a different color. We might even go with white, actually. Let's find a color that'll work on both. What happens is that when the crisis hits, you start to charge down. I call this the critical curve. And whilst most of us are hopefully in profit still, at the moment, we start to drop down below. We head towards break even, and we head towards loss. Now, hopefully, the actions you take now are going to turn that position round, enable you to continue to operate at least for another few months, and then move into a recovery phase, which comes much later. And you get back to what some people call business as normal, but my sales mentor, Steve Brosman, pointed out to me, I use the expression, if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always had. His take on that is, if you do what you've always done, you won't get anything at the moment, because the whole thing's been turned on its head. Unfortunately, as we know, some businesses already are heading in this direction towards insolvency. Although, interestingly, some of the rules on insolvency by ASIC have been suspended to enable directors to actually stay in charge. But ideally, what we want to do is to actually move back up this curve, back towards recovery as soon as possible. How long? Who knows? I reckon it's probably 3 to 6 months, and that's not because of what the Prime Minister says. That's what I genuinely think. So the important thing is, though, that we recognise that excuse me. Is that the wonders of technology. The other thing that we should be looking at, and I think this is increasingly what I'm hearing, particularly from smaller business and medium-sized business, is that it is a chance, like all disruptions, to actually, for some businesses, not all, but there's a chance to actually pivot, and pivot early, and have a look at your business model and see if there are other things you can do. This isn't only about going online. Some people think it's all about going online. Yes, that's a big element of it, but I think that there are more things and more ways, different value propositions, and I'll come to this later, that we can do to actually move away. And the sooner we move away from this curve here, the better for a lot of businesses. And so the challenge really is that some people weren't prepared for this, because how could you prepare for the 1 in 100 year event? Some people will have some idea or be adapting something, but the plans maybe aren't working. The most important thing at this moment, I think, is, and I've seen this with past events, is people start looking backwards to see why the plans aren't working, and that really doesn't serve any purpose at all. It's not looking back. You've got to look at here, understand where you are, get the situation in view, and then look forward. And the most important thing, and why I'm doing this, is purely to see if I can help people bring some energy and some fresh thinking to what's an incredibly difficult situation. And the example that I always use when I talk on subjects like this or about this is Apollo 13. Apollo 13, they had contingency plans for all sorts of things, but nothing could have prepared them for when the side blew out of their spaceship. Nothing could have prepared them for that. And so although it's fictionalized in the film, if you actually read accounts, pretty much what went on was what the film depicts. There were all sorts of people working on all sorts of solutions. And it was all done with energy, with fresh thinking, a little bit of planning, not a lot, but a little bit of planning and action. And I think that's really what my emphasis, when people start to talk sort of doom and gloom, my response is, well, what are you doing about it? What's your actions? I don't know about you, my cash flow has been hit hugely. So I'm very rapidly rethinking a lot of things that I'm doing. I'm trying to create new things and new opportunities. And I know that colleagues are as well. So looking back at the past, the only thing to say about the past is that this is not without precedent. People keep saying unprecedented. There are precedents. They just weren't as severe as this. SARS in 2003 and the GFC of 2007, 2008. They weren't on this scale, but nevertheless, you can learn much about what we've done can be applied out of those sorts of things. One of the things we're kind of fighting, I think, at the moment is there's a lot of bleak news in the media. And the important thing to remember when people talk about this is that we came through SARS, we came through the GFC, and we will come through this. Some people are in deep, deep trouble. I know that, and I'm not belittling that. But there will be sufficient people will break through this that will be able to restart the economy and really get it moving again. Because what it's ultimately about is about breaking through. In learning and development, which is where I've spent a lot of my career, we find that we get peaks in training investment are counter-cyclical. So it sounds odd, but times like this is when training organisations, universities, and other institutions like that, TAFEs and so on and so forth, once you're out of once you're out of the lockdown, or even during the lockdown, you'll start to get a peak, especially if the government starts to put some investment that will allow us to do that. And I hear out of Canberra that the government is starting to think about how they can put money into training to help people reskill, which I think is very important. So the important thing is to focus squarely on what next. And I was watching, I've put together a course for somebody the other day. And one of the things that I'm very keen on is this idea that Tom Peters codified. It's been around for years, but Tom Peters in the 1980s really brought it to the fore. And that's that good managers have a bias for action. That think, what can we do to break through? How can we do it? And I'll go back to this picture again, is that, you know, the outcome that I want for you and for people like you and your clients and people that you work with is that if you haven't already done that, getting more control, really start to think about preparing for recovery and doing the right things for you. Your family is obviously important to you, and to the people that you work with, your partners and your clients too. And that's all around people, operations, cash flow, continuing in business first. That's the priority. And then looking to see how to recover. What do you need? What do you want? These are the important things that we need about. And again, there is repetition in this, I know, but we really are talking about how on earth do you actually break through? That's about data, it's about planning, and it's about actions. It's also about courage. There are a lot of people who are taking the lead in this, and people I didn't expect to, but there are. It's about humanity, teamwork, leadership, and mental toughness. Now, I'll say this in a public forum. I have not previously had a great deal of time for our Prime Minister for all of his faults, but he's gone up in my estimation with the way that he's taken the lead on this. I may not agree with everything that he does or everything he's proposing, but I think he set a good example of leadership and has grown as a leader. And that's important, that you do get people stepping up. And people like us in this room, I know a little bit about some of you, people like us who step up can really help others and set the example. One of the things that I always fight, and I talk about strategic planning, and I've taught strategic planning for a long time, is that planning is boring, or at least it's boring for some people. It's not. It's not for me. I'm a planning wonk, for want of a better expression. But what the other thing that I know for sure, having worked in risk and crisis management, is it's incredibly difficult to get people to spend money on risk management unless it's mandated by law. We know that planning for crises is a waste of time until you actually need it. The important thing to say at this point is that what I'm advocating, I love planning too, Brendan. Brendan just put a post up, he loves planning. The important thing to say at the moment is that we're not planning for a crisis. It's actually too late, we're actually in it. We're not planning for a disruption. What I'm trying to get to talk to people about is planning for action. What are you going to do? And to do that, I've pulled together bits of crisis management theory and practice with business modeling, and that's where I've got to. And I'm also pulling in common sense. I looked at something this morning, I thought, that's really stupid, why am I saying that? So that got crossed out. But it's just a little planning goes a long way, and that's what I'm advocating for, not advertising anything. So just think about the three things while you're listening, and that is, I think in terms of agendas in situations like this, in terms of 4 hours, 8 hours, 24 hours, and 48 hours at this time. That's where we're at because it's so fast moving. But then I think we've then got to start to think a month ahead, a quarter ahead, and then 12 months ahead. If this thing is going to run for a quarter, or if this run's going to, if the locks don't come off until 6 months' time, which I think is like, I think Australia may open a little bit at the end of the quarter, not much, but a little. But I don't think the locks are going to come. I don't think we're going to let anybody in or out until probably September. Is what I think is going to happen.
Yeah.
So I really do think, I think it's going to be very difficult because of the ripple effect around the world that's going on. So it hasn't finished growing in India yet, and it hasn't finished growing in other places. And we have a lot of incoming, for example, we have a lot of incoming students from India. Mm-hmm. So it's a question of when do you open your borders to let people in? If it's not, so those are the judgments that the experts, the medics, are going to have to take. So we're going to have to start to think about that soon. And it's working out, the other thing to think about is to work out what the situation actually is for your business. And I've revised mine several times in the last few days. And then if you work in a team organization, get your team together and ask them how they're doing. The other vital thing is if you if you don't work in a team, I think it's equal, or clients who don't work in a team, get them into a team, because one of the most important things that we need to do is to make sure that people are communicating and not isolated. So the other thing, how you're traveling yourself, and I think that's a great point Brendan's just raised, and I think is entirely appropriate. Yes, flattening the curve will probably extend the recovery time. The issue I think that we've got is that we still don't have something to counteract this medically, and until we've got that, it'll be very difficult to predict that. And that's why I think we've all got to have different plans with different timescales on coping with the recovery. I think we'll get a better idea over the next month as to what's going to happen, and we'll see. Because the big question is America. I was going to present at a conference in August. That conference is now not going to happen, and it's a question of how much effort America puts in to get hold of what's going on. It's also a question of what is actually going on in China, because we still don't know the full extent of it. So that's why I think we're going to be locked in for a little while longer than we perhaps first thought. The metaphor that I use, before I go any further, has anybody got any burning questions they want to ask? right now, or shall I just press on?
I'm saving some up for the moment. I just don't want to see how
Okay,
we go.
cool. Well, we'll certainly have a chance to talk at the end. I'm not going to go on for too much longer, but I thought I've one or two other things to say.
Mm-hmm.
The way I characterise this is it's kind of like it. I mean, it sounds like I'm trivialising it. I'm not. It is like a serious sporting injury. You've got to adapt the treatment plan that you've got. Big crises like this, like Chernobyl, like Fukushima, like others that have happened before, they're very fast moving. And this is very fast moving. There's a change every day. There's something else happening. And you need to have a plan that can be adapted. And so one enterprise I ran was threatened with closure by the regulator. And that was 3 days after I started. I knew it got problems. I just didn't know it got that many problems. But we weren't allowed to sell anything until we responded. They just said, no, you're not. You cannot take any more clients. And so we put a project together. It took us about 6 weeks to get everything sorted out. But then we were allowed to start trading. But that was so fast moving that it was really difficult. But 12 months later, we were back at capacity. And there are steps that you need to take. If you're by yourself, you need a team to work with to try out ideas out on, I think. But if you are a bigger organization, you need to get your team together. You've got to have a regular agenda. You've got to understand the situation. You've got to understand the impact. I hasten to add, I'll send out at the end, I'll send everybody a copy of a pack with some documents that explain all of this. So don't, if you're interested in that, I'll send that. I will send it to you anyway. You've got to work out what the impact is. You've got to work out what's been disrupted in your business or your clients' businesses. How are you going to continue in business? What are your goals? What actions do you need to take? The messaging is absolutely vital. And Peter, you worked in PR and still do, I know. And you know that in things like this, messaging is absolutely important, that you get the messaging right and you get the message to the right people at the right time. And how are you going to recover, or how are you actually going to pivot away from this? What are you going to do differently than you have been? And my ideas for what I was going to do with my own private practice are changing. Literally now, I'm starting to see different things that I think I would want to do. So you need to understand what's your crew like. The most vital person in your crew at the moment is probably your accountant, if you are a small business or self-employed. Mine is brilliant. Raj at DSM Accounting, he'll contact me and say, have we done this yet? If you're in a bigger organization, absolutely. The usual suspects are usually in the room, but they're probably in a different order. And the CEO might not head the team. And if it's a deep crisis, they should be out messaging. And that's what I saw this morning. My wife works at Western Sydney University, and the Vice Chancellor and his senior team were on Zoom this morning messaging all staff. That's actually usually the best place for them, to be blunt in some cases with some CEOs. They're better to be up front and then someone in the background. I wouldn't say who knows what they're doing. I wouldn't dare say that. But someone in the background who is usually a very good project manager, is usually the type of animal you want on this, is actually managing the whole thing. And as Brendan's just said to all of us, they've got a clear set of objectives, they've got a clear set of goals, and then you get a plan in place and you adjust it up and down to actually achieve them. But some people, some organisations seem to struggle with the idea of adjusting the plan, which I've never really understood, but they do. Part of that is, and this is setting the objectives, is what's the agenda? You've got to have an agenda set, and I'll send out a set of ideas for you on that. When I did a restructure of an enterprise, which was very problematic because there were a lot of there's a big trade union involved. We met every Friday during the restructure to work out what was going on, and indeed adjust the plans, change, and in some cases change the objectives because it was so fast moving. You need to understand your objectives, the people, what impact it's got on the community, clients and customers, what's it doing to your product sets, the revenue, the processes, the resources and partners. And I map this all out usually using a thing called business model canvas, and I'll send you a copy in the little set that you've got, and you can build your agenda around that. It's a really useful shorthand. You need to try and understand what the situation is. Yes, it looks like Top Gun, the new Top Gun film is going to be delayed for the Top Gun wonks amongst us, me included. But I use the idea of a fighter pilot because you've really got to have eyes everywhere and be ready to act. It's no good, although we're all forced to sit in an office to an extent at the moment, although some of us are going out, moving around, we need to be very situationally aware. Cheers to Centre Palace. It's interesting. So I've just had a note that it's not going out to, okay. Let's try that. Could somebody send me a comment? Charles, could you just send me a comment? And let's just make sure everybody's getting the notes. That's better. Sorry, Brendan, I got one of the settings wrong. And everybody. I think everybody should be able to see the chat now. Excellent.
No problem, Clive. You're doing a great job. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Where was it? Sorry. You just need to, it's understanding the situation that you're in, and at least virtually making sure you're calling people, making sure you're speaking. If you like me, find a group of people to work with. I've got a group of people I work with. We meet twice a week now, and we're talking all the time about what's going on, what's happening. The reason for situational awareness, you understand what's going on better, you understand how long it's liable to run, you understand what workarounds are in place, you can start to understand some of the causes. We know what the cause is here, but there are other things that are going on. Solutions might drop into place simply by talking with other people. You understand the scale of the solutions that you're trying to put in, you understand resourcing, and whether or not, if you're in a bigger organization, if you need to take it upstairs. So it's just having that awareness of what's happening. What you know now is you need to understand the impact, and this is, again, there's no new, there's nothing new in business theory. I was chatting with a friend. He said he was a bit upset that he was teaching an MBA course not long ago, and one of the young guys down the front said, "My dad asked to be remembered to you." And he said he was pleased to see that you were still teaching the same stuff that he learned 20 years ago. So, but there is no new, there's no new theory, but this is one of the most valuable things you can ask. What's the impact on who, to what, when did the impact occur, where, why, and how, and keep asking those questions. Because there will be different impacts on people and community, different impacts on reputation, financial performance, the legal and compliance side of things, and on operations, on strategy. And we all need to understand what the main impact is now. We need to understand what is being disrupted. So coming at another level, it's kind of like a power cut. What's been switched off, and that's why you need that idea of situational awareness. The communication plan's important. It's absolutely vital that the communication plan is in place. What's the messaging? Who you're sending it to? And Peter's just made a comment. I'll come back to that one right at the end, and don't let me forget that, Peter, around actually managing this. To get in control of a crisis, you've got to have a communications plan. Which stakeholders, what method, what's the key message, who's responsible, and what's the time frame and schedule. The best way to do this still, or now, is short video messaging. It really does help hugely. There's been some good messaging I've seen. There's been some less good messaging as well, particularly in the early sense. And I love James Thurber, the American wit. And he said, a word to the wise is not sufficient if it doesn't make sense. So we've got to really understand why our communications need to be. We also need to write down what it is we've sent, because you may need this. It's important legally if you're in a particularly legally bound business. You may need to explain to the board why you've done things that you've done and how you've done them. It's also important to help you learn from past issues. If you're in a highly regulated organisation, which is the type of organisations that I advise a lot are highly regulated, it's vital in dealing with the regulators. They want to know exactly why you've done what you've done. I work with higher education organisations, and the regulator, TEXA, is very hard-nosed about this. So will other regulators be, although they're being relatively soft at the moment. You need to understand, forgive the metaphor, but you need to understand what now. You know, are you doing the right things? What are the critical elements of your business model that you need to have operate to stay in order? And this is the model that I use. What you're doing as you're just coming to terms with things in any organisation is what I call value assurance. You're trying to preserve value with your existing customers and customer segments. So you're trying to keep those relationships running as much as you can. But you're also trying to conserve the value in your business by making sure that your partners that you need are lined up. A lot of us are chained in with partners, that the activities that you do can either work as they should now, if you're in an office environment still, or if you're online, can you make them work? And also, have you still got some of the key resources that you actually need? At the same time, we've all got to look at costs at the moment. We've got to eliminate costs and we've got to reduce costs. That's always true, but it's especially true at the moment. Once you've got a handle on that, and that's being managed very carefully, and you'll always need to manage that, the next step is what next? And yes, I am going to persist with the metaphor. It's really a case of really looking at how you can recover value. This is the classical business recovery, business continuity route. And once you've got into a recovery phase, you're really looking to renew value with your existing customers and your existing products. Then you're also trying to recreate value and open up things that you'd stopped producing to try and recover the value. It goes back to a thing called blue ocean strategy, and it's really just throwing a life belt into the blue ocean that you're working in. It's how do you preserve your core customer segments and relationships, and how do you conserve the value generating parts of what it is you're doing. What next? I think there are some houses in New South Wales that probably look like this at the moment, actually.
That's where it all went to, Clive, wasn't it?
But there's another thing that some people are starting to do, people that I work with and others are starting to think about this. And that is they're saying, okay, we can't do what we've always done. Some of it will not go back. Some of it will not turn back to where we are. Let's start to try and do things differently. And even if they're not going to work now, they may work as we come out of this whole situation much later. And this is classical. It's called Blue Ocean Strategy. Kim Chan and Rennie Morborn, I can never say her name, they wrote this book, nearly 20 years ago now. And they talk about how do you create value for new customers in new markets, and how do you raise value? And what you do is you actually play with these different elements of your business model. So you can actually start to say, what can I do in terms of how do I manage my customer relationship differently? And I'm seeing this happening literally live in front of me with different networks that I'm actually in. The channels are changing for sure. And a lot of the channels are online channels. The other thing that's happening is we're seeing new partnerships. I've started partnering with somebody who I never thought I'd partner with, which is very interesting. The way that I organize some of my activities has changed, and I'm seeing that with other people as well. one of my friends and colleagues, Lisa O'Neill, who you may or may have not heard of, she's a public speaker and a very, very good one based out of New Zealand. She's also hilarious, I've got to say. Lisa did a book launch online, I think it was last night. She had 600 people watching her on a Zoom conference. 600 people. She sold 80 books, 80 other things. So it's really worked quite well. Sorry, you've just got a view of Siri. I don't know why it's done that. So people are starting to do different things. We're looking at key resources too, but always at the same time, we're keeping an eye on cost. It's going to be interesting to see what happens to the office rental market after this. I think that's going to be very interesting to see when people start to think about things differently. So that, I think, is important, and that's how some of us and some businesses will start to pivot out of this whole thing. They'll start to actually change all of these areas. And there's a copy of that business model canvas in the pack, which I'll send through to you. Once we've kind of got out of this, and I'm nearly finishing up here, it's really important, and some of you will have done project management stuff, I'm sure, to understand what is it that we did that did well, what we were really strong on, what were our key actions, what were our strengths, what didn't we do so well, and how did we actually follow up. I always remember I once did a public meeting in the middle of a restructure and got absolutely roasted, and I had no experience whatsoever of running a public meeting like that. So I went off and got media training. So I learned something very quickly out of that. There are some things that I know that I'm going to work on moving forward. Most of us are going to come through this. Most of us won't have businesses that look exactly the same, although some of us will have slight differences in our business. As long as we get a plan, and as Brendan pointed out earlier, get a set of objectives and adjust the plan as you go through as things become clear. I'm going to come to Peter's question about that in a moment. The most important thing I go back to in all of this is just keep looking at your agenda. What are you going to do over the next several hours? And then as we get a better idea of where we're going in terms of data and forecasting, start to think about the next month, then the next quarter, then onto the next 12 months. Work out what the situation actually is for your business and ask somebody what they think as well. And get your team together and ask them how they're doing, not just at work, but at home too. Sometimes I think we lose sight of that, that sometimes although we are at home, and I've watched a number of people, it's really interesting to see where people work out of. I'm in the library, but it's really interesting to see where people work and what their circumstances are. And my closing comment, and then we'll just move into a general discussion. And I'll open the mics up because there's only a few of us. I like Dale Carnegie because he was one of the first thought leaders, I suppose, as they're called nowadays, and I suppose management gurus, I suppose. And it's inaction breeds doubt and fear. Action breeds confidence and courage. If you want to conquer fear, don't sit at home and think about it. Go out and get busy. Well, don't go out, only go out in groups of 2, but do go out and do get yourself an action plan together, because I think there's some very simple things that we can do that will help us. And I'll send all of you my little action pack that I use to do that. And this is not a sales pitch. It really isn't. If you or any of your clients just want to talk to somebody about how those ideas can work, just drop me a line and I will tell them what I think. I'll give them a mini version of that presentation. I'll walk them through the document set. I will not try and sell them a damn thing. That's not what I'm doing this for. I'm just trying to help people out. So that's about all I have to say formally. So what I'm going to do is to stop I'll keep my screen shared because I might need to draw something, but I'm going to unmute people. Brendan, you're on the phone still, aren't you? I think so. I won't unmute you.
Yes, I am. Yep.
Leon, I've just unmuted you if you want to join us, and Charles, I've just unmuted you.
Hello, Clive. How are you?
Hi, Leon. I think Karen has gone off to try and work on a plan. So, has anybody got? I'll deal with Peter. Peter asked about orchestrating the solution. Oh, you're there. Hello. Sorry, Karen. I've just lost you. You've dropped off my screen. Let me just try and unmute you. Where have you gone? Let's have a look. Oh, that's interesting. Hold on a minute. There we go. Let me just get my attendees up. Karen, where are you?
See, it's all about orchestration, Clive.
It's all about orchestration. There we go. Let me unmute you, Karen. Allowed to talk. You are unmuted. And Hassan has just joined us. A little bit late. I just finished up Hassan, but never mind.
I've been on for ages.
So. Oh, right. Okay.
I'm here.
Look, it's anybody. I just wanted to deal with how you orchestrate things like this. It's about, obviously, I think I'm talking to people with smaller organisations. You need to have. My experience relates to doing a restructure which was problematic, and I had a team of 2 or 3 in the room at any one time, and it was what I think it was Brendan said earlier. Just get a really simple set of goals. There's a theory of goals which says don't have more than between 5 and 9. That's the theory of goals, because if you've got any more than that, chances are you won't achieve them. Try and get between, I talk about 7. Just try and get 5. Communicate them well. Get your plan on a page. Communicate them well. Say what you're trying to achieve and get the main actions down. Communicate them a bit like voting, early and often and that's the only way I know of orchestrating. I was chatting with somebody earlier from a tech company that I'm working with, Cassandra, and she's got all of her team, and they're all over Australia. She's got them all in the room for an hour on Monday morning. My wife, who's a course quality officer at Western Sydney, her boss gets them in the room on a Monday. So that we go. Leon, you got a question?
No, I don't, Clive.
Oh, you're just letting me know.
Yeah. I'm letting you know that I'm here.
Cool. Thank you, Leon. Brendan, you have anything you wanted to ask?
Oh, yes. I was just about to type something. Actually, you can hear me okay, Clive?
Yes, I can. Yeah, super. Thank you.
Yes, I was just going to say it's actually fascinating to me how few people properly understand strategy and setting objectives. Yep. They tend to just keep doing what they've done and yep. Then go, well, it's just sort of not getting us anywhere. I was just going to make the point. It's actually incredibly powerful just measuring something. Yep. So measuring what you're doing in the context of goals and objectives that you've set is incredibly powerful in its own right. And it's even with this COVID-19 crisis situation, I find it quite perplexing that we've been able to, as a globe, get very clear. We take it as it is, as it comes to us. It's assessing and analysing the data that's coming. It's statistical evidence to the extent that we can trust it, but we haven't done that on the scale that we're doing it right now. I don't feel ever before that there is, in my mind, many other diseases, situations happening around the world that causes far more incidents and fatalities than what COVID-19 is. And yet suddenly, because we're focusing on this metric and reporting it very regularly, that's gotten everyone's attention, and that's what we're putting our time and effort into. So if you look at that example, if we translate what the effect of that is into our own businesses, if we've set, as you've said, some short, simple, not too many goals and objectives, and set up ways of measuring and reporting those, it gets people's attention, it focuses resources, and lo and behold, when you do that, you start to progress towards achieving them.
That's right. I think it's important, and that great points. There's a guy called Chris McChesney who wrote a book an age ago called The 4 Disciplines of Execution, which some of you might have come across. And what he and his colleagues who helped him to write that book talk about is exactly what you've said. Is what they do is they tie to each goal and each objective, they actually tie some form of lead indicator as well as some form of lag indicator. And one of the issues I think we've got, Brendan, is you're quite right. I think we spend, as an economy, the Western economies, spend too much time looking at lag indicators and not enough time looking at lead indicators. And what I like about the medical data that we're seeing is that we're seeing lead indicators coming through. And the lead indicators are things like who's catching it and what the projected curve of it is, because that's what's telling us. The lag indicators, and this is a terrible thing to say, is, the lag indicators, I'll get my board back. The lag indicators are unfortunately things like the death rate. We need to understand, I think, more about what we're doing in terms of lead, and that extends to our businesses. And I'm writing something at the moment to talk to help people plan for this, and that is that I want to know what you're planning for your sales funnel. I know that the chances are for medium-sized enterprise, small businesses, that your cash flow is probably problematic, he said politely, at the moment. That's fine, but that's a lag indicator. So what most of my two main networks that I work with are talking about is what are their plans for promoting? What are we doing about sales? Why we want, now some people don't want to know about that at the moment, and I get that and I understand it 100%. Some people do. So we need very clearly to have that idea of what are we doing moving forward.
Clive, Brendan again, if I could just add one other important point here. One of the things you would have noticed, and we see with the reporting and the statistics that we're seeing around COVID-19, in a similar way to the way we report road trauma incidents and fatalities. I've got a background in road safety as well as quality management. Now, what is often not done with that statistical reporting is reporting against the population that it's relating to. I find that a massive omission. We should absolutely understand that it's the correlation between the indicator, lag or lead. It has to be correlated to the population that it's representing. If you don't do that, you face the risk of putting a lot of resources into the wrong things. So we've got to, I suppose, balance consideration of importance and performance. Ultimately, we should be focusing our energy onto the things that are important and making sure it's the things that are important that we're performing in, as much as it is balanced against the things that are less important. We don't want to just let some of the less important things drop off altogether either.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Brendan. It is 2 minutes to 3, and I always aim to finish on time. Peter, I wanted to thank you for helping to organise this small select group.
Thank you.
And what I'll do is I'll email people out just that little guide I've got. If you don't want to use it, just use the little bin at the side of your screen. But there's just a little guide with some documents. Please, when I send it to you, please feel free to give it to any of your clients, any colleagues that you wish to. And I'm not precious about it. It's just helping people to get organised if I can. That's all that's about. And I don't expect anything else from it. You'll see I'll be putting out on my LinkedIn feed a number of thoughts around what's going on over the next few days. Please feel free to comment. But other than that, if you've got any more questions once we've done, please drop me a line. Quite happy to take them. I'll do the best I can to answer them. Whatever your circumstance, I can only wish you well over the next few months with what's going on. And perhaps I look forward to talking to you all again in the not too distant future. So thank you for your time. There will be a recording available of this, which I'll work out how I'm going to edit it a little bit because there's some chat at the beginning that we don't need. And we'll see how that goes. And please, again, feel free to use it.
That would be great, because I know there are folk who wanted to be here who, you know, for the reasons that we are all confronted with at the moment, couldn't make it. So
Okay.
you touched on some fantastic points, and it is much appreciated.